Okay, this is going to be our 7B, Biology 7B, and this is going to be talking about natural selection, and this is how we actually get one organism to maybe evolve or to change into another organism. New thing here is going to be this particular picture. This picture is going to mean I'm going to want you to draw a certain object on the slide, and this one I'd like you to draw this picture of the tree with the three long-necked critters. And this is going to be what John Baptiste Lamarck is going to use for his idea of how things change through time. So what he thought is he said that there were a whole bunch of short-necked giraffes at one point, and the organisms that actually reached up higher, his neck grew, and then they passed that on to their babies, and then the next one had reached up even higher, and the next grew, and they went to their babies. And it basically is what's called the use-disuse principle. So here are the two giraffes actually being about the same height. This one's eating small foliage and this one's eating taller foliage. And because of that, this giraffe's neck grows. And this is not growth through generations. This is growth through an individual. Like you could actually concentrate on growing and get taller. And then basically what happened is we had two different types of giraffes. This one apparently didn't survive, couldn't see danger coming, couldn't reach food, whatever the reason. This one disappeared because we don't have any short-necked giraffes anymore, and all we have now are long-necked giraffes. So through time, the neck of the giraffe got longer and longer and longer. Natural selection. You guys all know the story about how an elephant got its long nose. Apparently, at some point in time, the elephant's nose was a lot shorter, and I even heard in the story, this is a young kid's story, that it was boot-shaped, and it was down drinking water one day, and then the alligator came up and grabbed onto its short nose, and of course the elephant didn't like that, so the elephant pulls, and the alligator pulls, and the elephant pulls, and eventually what happens is we got a longer nose. Here's a little bit more realistic view of it. So the nose got longer and longer, and then from every generation after that, the nose of the babies got longer and longer and longer, and then eventually we had a population of long-nosed elephants. Now, that doesn't happen because probably what happened is generation after generation, this nose got longer and longer, and this longest nose was more able to survive. So they actually passed them on. The shorter nosed elephants didn't survive long enough to pass that trait on. So with time, the nose got longer and longer. And this is a cute story, but I actually found, looking through Google, I actually found evidence of it. Here is evidence of a alligator pulling on an elephant's nose and getting longer and longer and longer. By the way, the elephant eventually drags the alligator over. The alligator loses interest and goes back in the water, and the elephant survives. The baby's nose you can't see, but it's a short nose. So these were short-nosed elephants until this alligator pulled the nose and got longer and longer and longer. And so this elephant passes on its traits to all of its new babies, where this baby had a short nose. And that's not true because that baby does have a short nose, because I saw other images of this same altercation. 9B, the big guy in terms of natural selection is a guy by the name of Charles Darwin. He's an English scientist back in the 1800s. We see most of the pictures of Charles Darwin looking like this, and we're going to do a project, not a project, we're going to do an activity next class where you're going to see a cartoon image of Charles Darwin who'll look more like this, and his language will be a little different than, or accent will be a little different than what you expect, but you'll see that later on. So he works as a naturalist on the ship called Her Majesty's Service Beagle, HMS Beagle. Beagle was a sailing ship, a very fast sailing ship, and what its job was to sail around the world and collect samples of different species or weird species and bring them back to England so they can be, or Europe, so they can be studied. And you can see it goes out this direction, pops around Galapagos Islands, where he does a lot of his study, and that's what we're going to talk about here shortly. Pops back across the Pacific Ocean, New Zealand, Australia, all these little islands out here, and then hits South Africa, goes across again to South America, and that's because of the currents that are flowing basically counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere or the northern hemisphere, and then eventually goes back up, hits the Azores, another set of islands, and then comes back to where he started. And the whole process took him about 2.5 years. So what did he do? Well, one of the things he noticed when he got to the Galapagos, he actually had a bunch of finch, different types of finch, that had different types of mouth parts for eating insects, for cracking seeds, for actually cracking even bigger seeds. And all these different species, he's going to come about because if you go to South America, the finch looks like this. And he actually finds a finch, calls them warbler finch, but he finds a finch that's very closely related to these, and then he actually says that these things change up into seed eaters, cactus flower eaters, think that, okay, bud eaters, insect eaters. I thought that was supposed to be bug, but these are insects. So buds, so flower buds, and then insect eaters, and then these actually are seed eaters. So we actually take a look at all these different mouth parts, and all coming from one mouth part, and basically landing on different islands that had mostly seeds or mostly insects. And because of that, this changed through time, making the individual more successful and more likely to pass its traits on to individuals. So it's not a generational thing where they can actually change because they want to. It's more of a multi-generational, probably even thousands of generations, where one trait actually gets picked by the environment so that the individuals can survive. So they change through time. There are some stresses on individuals. If the population gets too big, there's something called the carrying capacity. Organisms produce more offspring than the niche can sustain. This is if you've ever looked at some of the population, puppies have 8, 9 puppies. If we actually had one alpha female and that's all they had, that was probably good. But if you had more than one female having 6 to 8 puppies a time, it probably can't survive. Not all of them can survive because there isn't enough food. And the same thing for bunnies, which these things may be hunting. The bunny population is going to not do really well when the puppies are there. And then we'll talk about that in the picture. Here's a picture of overpopulation. I used to think this was going into a subway, but that is not a subway. This looks more like I don't know, a ticket window. But you can see there are a bunch of people, and some of these people aren't going to get anywhere close to whatever this is anytime soon. We do have overpopulation. So if you take a look at population through time, we had 2 to 5 million people for long time. There's 7,000 BC. Actually, not even 2 to 5. These are billions, so that probably is there. So going back that far, and then even 7,000 BC and 6,000 or 5,000 or 4,000, you see it's almost a horizontal population change. There is a little bit of change, and you can see it goes up and down because of stresses. The bubonic plague, the Black Plague, actually does show up in the population because it kills about a third of Europe. And then right after that is the industrial population, around 1800s, and then all of a sudden the population goes up through 1 billion, 2 billion. 1962-ish, it got to 3 billion, and I was alive at that point. I was born in 1957. So I've seen 3, 4, 5, 6. Last year it was 7. I don't know when it's going to be 8, but probably in the next decade it'll be 8, and then 9 and 10 and 11, and you guys may actually get to see a whole lot more. So if you were born back in the 1600s, you were born with less than 1 billion people, and the population really didn't change a bunch because of all different kinds of stresses on the population. Well, here are some of the stresses. The carrying capacity actually is pollution, disease, and let's talk about this one because this is the one I want you to draw. If you take a look at the breeding stock, which is this red line, this is also the carrying capacity. This is what the particular niche, particular area can survive. But during the spring, there's an overpopulation, and we're talking about geese, deer. I don't know if that's I don't know what that is. Grouse. and then bunnies. And if you take a look at that population goes up. And then late spring, it's way up. Early summer, it's way up. And then early summer, something happens. So the surplus is decreased by too many critters, not enough food, so some starve. Too many critters, and disease has a very good chance of going from one individual to another, knocks out some of the population. Accidents, they move into areas where they don't think or they know they really shouldn't go, but because of population stresses, they have to. That could be like roads and cars. Weather incidents can knock down population. Hunting season, which happens in fall, knocks down population, and predators knocks down population, because these all taste good. So population goes up because populations actually produce a lot more organisms than can survive, and then they go back down to what's called the carrying capacity. And again, annual population exceeds the population, but because of lots of different things, the population stays pretty much the same. This is a picture, two pictures I found on Twitter yesterday, as well as the picture that's going to pop up here and here. This is coming from population growth on Twitter, and it says, where is the greatest population growth? And it says world population 1950. So this was before I was born, 2.53 billion. And you can take a look, and it looks like most of the population, if you look at the dots, looks like most of the population was in India and China. Doesn't surprise anybody. And then by 2050, it's actually thought that the population will look like this. And again, where India had some black areas, it pretty much all is yellow, and China grows, and Vietnam, and Indonesia, and Africa, Madagascar, South America along the coastlines, North America, Central America, the Caribbean down here. You can see the population goes up a little farther north. Australia picks up a few more people, but maybe almost 10 billion people by 2050. It's actually said if you took everybody that lives in China and you put them in a line and they walk past you, it would take 30 years to get all that 1.8 billion people in China to walk past you. 30 years. That's a lot of folks. And then by 2100, population may be 11 billion. It probably is going to be Asian. There are more Chinese on the planet than any other single population. And if you take a look, Africa's got quite a few folks in here now. India has quite a few folks. So the population is probably going to continue to grow. This is what's called National Geo's Face of 7 billion. And what they did is they actually looked at males and females, and there are more males, so they made the person male. They looked at all the nationalities, and they looked at home and language and nationality and religion and livelihood and urban versus rural areas and literacy. And the really cool thing is that almost 90% of the planet is literate, which means they can read. And if you actually click this link or just type in face of 7 billion, you can get this, and I'll actually go show you this. So here's the picture. Language, it says 13% of all the people are Mandarin. This is why we actually have a Mandarin male. Nationality, 19% are Chinese. Religion, 33% Christian. Livelihood, 40% work in services, providing service to other individuals. Urban or rural, 51% live in urban environments, so that's different than it was, just a few years ago. And literacy, 82% of the planet is literate. So we still have 18% that can't read, at least not to their level. Okay, bacterial growth curve. Even bacteria show carrying capacity, or K capacity. If you take a look, we got a lag phase, and this is when we give them everything they want to go. An exponential growth, it goes up very quickly, and then it actually gets to what's called the stationary phase, where it kind of holds true. And then we have the death phase. And did I want you? I guess I don't want you to draw that. The death phase, where we eventually goes out, and if we get a little bit more material, or it can start assimilating some of the material that's in here, and the dead material, it may go up a little bit, but usually just going to go down. And if it's a closed environment, it may go down all the way over. And these are an hour, so within 4 days, the whole bacteria phase is gone. Natural selection is driven by 4 things. organism has to struggle to survive, and it's all competition. Fights over very limited resources. One of them is food. If there's lots of food, you get lots of critters. If the critters actually deplete the food, then the critter population goes down. They fight over water. If you don't have water, your population is not going to be very big. If you got lots of water, it's going to be bigger. Space to live. If you're an eagle, you don't have very many eagles per square mile because of the things that they eat. So if there's a lot of space, again, a lot of critters. If there's a little space, the critters go down. And then last thing is reproduction. You can actually see these bear. They'll actually do not like to be this close, but they'll actually allow this to happen because there's so much food. Salmon trying to get up this stream to spawn. There's so much food in this area, they'll actually put up with each other, where once the salmon stop running, these guys will actually move 30, 40, 50 miles away from this location in all different directions because there isn't enough food, there isn't enough water, and there's not enough space because bears do not like to see each other, unless, of course, they're mating. So if they're actually going through mates, they'll actually fight. The organisms survive. Some of them can get injured to the point where they will no longer survive. Probably has to do with the horn, the antler length. Antlers, probably the longer the antler, probably the better they fight, and more likely that's going to get passed on to the next generation. So antler length, there probably can get too large of a rack. These things tend to not go through trees very well, so they spend a lot of time in grassland when these antlers actually are, um, they're not really bone material. They've got velvet on them while they're growing, so they're actually produced by bone, and then they'll lose these as we get in towards winter. It's basically there just for the rut season to try to compete for females, and some of these racks can be very large. Genetic variation. If you look at populations, you can see lots of differences. A really good example that we're going to talk about is this peppered moth. We have about, when you look at the population, 95, 98% of the population has this pepper kind of shape, and then 2 to 3 population actually has this, where the pepper looks like it's gone crazy, and you get this darker variation. And these happen naturally in nature. One of them seems to be more likely to survive. It's been selected to, and the other one selected against. So organisms have different characteristics or traits due to variances, and these are all caused by DNA differences, and a lot of them caused by crossover during this prophase 1 in meiosis, where you actually get these sister chromatids to cross over between these two pair and these two pair, where we actually get different setups, and because of that we actually do get different kids. This is actually 4 quintuplets, or is it quin? It's got to be quad. This is an older sister, but you can see genetically they're very similar. The ones that are actually of the same birth are more similar. This male, and these 3 females, all graduating from, I don't know, let's say college, but they're graduating, but you can see similarities, but there are variations because of this crossover. Survival of the fittest, and you got to be careful with fit. It's not strong, it's not tall, it's not fast, it's not smart, it's not, I don't know, whatever characteristic you want. It's all the characteristics. It's whatever it takes to survive. If you take a look back before the 1950s in Europe, the trees were covered by lichen, and you can see 2 individuals here. The peppered moth actually blended in really well, and this is one way that this population is larger. The black moth was really easy to see, and was actually picked on by predators. In the 1950s, when they started dumping coal into the air, the coal actually covered up the lichen, killed the lichen, made the trees dark in color, and that actually flipped the percentages of population between the peppered moth that was good against the lichen is no longer good against the coal blackened bark, and the black one actually now blends in, so the population was going up. Luckily, we've actually started to clean up the air, and the trees are getting covered by lichen again, and the peppered moth is actually enlarging. And there they are if you couldn't see them, which I don't know why you couldn't. There's also survival of the fittest in terms of the male gamete sperm trying to get to the egg, female gamete. Only one is going to get there. It could be the fastest, could be the smartest, because they get there with a chemical trail. So if it actually can follow it quickly. So even a birth of every critter, including yourself, was a survival, and the fittest one survived. And you all know about predator and prey. The predators usually pick the weakest, the youngest, the dumbest, the slowest, and they actually cull that right out of the population. So they're actually making the population stronger. So predation is actually good for the population. Reproduction is a stress. If you can live long enough, if you can survive long enough, you are going to pass these on to your babies, like puppies or turtles or camels. Organisms can survive long. If the organism can survive long enough, they have the chance to pass on their traits to the next generation. And that's what every individual wants to do, is to live long enough to reproduce and give rise to viable, because these puppies have to be able to reproduce, and the turtles and this camel have to be able to reproduce, otherwise the whole thing is for naught. And then we have what's called speciation. Eventually species change. The environment changes, they move into a different environment, and because of that, new species or new characteristics are more beneficial, and because of this, we get a speciation event. Cichlid diversity. Cichlids are actually designed not by this first, or determined not by this first jaw, but this second jaw that's down here. These are different cichlids that live in different rivers and different tropical areas. You can buy these things in aquaria. They're freshwater cichlids. And you can also see this salamander population in California, and I would like you to draw this. Because there's a mountain range and a Death Valley in the middle of California, when this population extended, some of them actually went towards the west side and some of them went toward the east side. And by the time they get back down here, these populations are so different because of the changes this side had versus the changes this one had. And you can see that the blue one changes sort of more blue or maybe more purple, and the blue one changes more green. So not only can these not reproduce with each other, you can't reproduce them with the one that's up here. So the population will change if the environment changes. Example of natural selection, antibiotic resistance, and I do want you to draw this. You're probably going to need some color because the color shows you the resistance. And this is the resistance. So low resistance and very high resistance, and this is more to, and I don't know if you can see this because the picture's there, but it gets more red as you go there, like that red right there. Antibacterial everything comes in, and it actually says survival of the fittest. It says it kills 99.9%. So my question is, what happens that other 10%? It's going to knock out all the ones that aren't really red or dark red. So after the selection, we've actually produced just red ones. So what happens in the next generation? The next generation is all resistant, and then this no longer kills 99.9%. So we're causing a speciation into more resistant bacteria by using antibacterial. Please use soap and water. It'll work just as well as antibacterial. Please use soap and water. We have, excuse me, we have three different types of evolution. We have what's called convergent. Convergent is when these things actually come together. We have divergent, where they spread apart, and they have parallel, where they go this direction. So A becomes S and T sort of becomes S. In other words, the way they look. And A becomes S and A becomes T because of the way they look and the way they act. And parallel, they change into something that's similar, but they're going to be two different types of critters, and I'll talk about all these. Convergent evolution is like this, where we have sharks, which are not a fish. We have ichthyosaur, which was a dinosaur, and we have dolphin, which was a mammal, and we actually have them, and they all have very similar body shape. These actually have up and down tails, vertical tails. This one has a horizontal tail, but these are all basically the same body shape, and they're all built for speed. And it's where we actually take different organisms and we turn them into very similar looking organisms. They are not the same. They cannot reproduce, but they are built the same because they live in the same environment. So non-related organisms attain similar traits because they live in the same environments, and these are evolutionary progressions. We have what's called divergent. Divergent is when we actually have something that is the same or similar, and they actually change through time, like the cactus finches are actually the finches that were on Galapagos Islands. So we have crushing beaks all the way over to parrot-like beaks. So they actually, because they lived in different places, their beaks changed with time. And we have these salamanders too, which is a divergent evolutionary process. Related organisms evolve different traits because they live in different environments. So they're related, but they end up getting more different because of these different environments. Parallel evolution is development of similar traits in related but distant species. And they actually turn into different clades. We'll actually talk about cladograms next in 9C. This is a cladogram, and these are called clades. And if you take a look at these, we had a speciation event where this one became the gravels, so the gavels, and these are really funky looking crocodilosaurs. And then we have crocodiles and alligators and caimans. But if you look at these two right here, these two actually, the caiman, which is this one, and this other crocodile, which, or the other alligator, the crocodiles are over here. So we have the one, two, three different basic types. Alligators went this direction, and then these are related to alligators. Caiman is an alligator, but they can no longer survive. So these are what are called parallel. They look very similar. They're from a similar ancestor, and they keep looking the same. Rates of evolution, I want you to draw both of these. One's called gradualism. Gradualism is when organisms change slowly over time, where you get this moth over time very slowly changing into two different species, or at least two very different types of individuals. This is Darwin's idea of natural selection, slow and over time. And then you also have what's called punctuated equilibrium. If we have a very large, quick change in the environment, we may actually get very sudden speciation, where this one may actually all of a sudden become this one, and some of them may actually become this one, and then later on some may become this one. So we'll end up with three at the end, where we still have the original, and then we get two different variations. This is organisms evolve quickly over time. This one actually, this was Darwin's, and this one's actually Gould's. Stephen Gould comes up with a punctuated equilibrium, and probably evolution is some of both of these, maybe more of the slow, but there are some times where temperatures and humidities have changed quickly over time, and we do get speciation. Selective breeding, last thing we need to talk about in 9B. Talk about a mustard plant. Mustard plants gave rise to cauliflower if we make the flowers sterile. Broccoli if we actually suppress the flower development. Cabbage if we strengthen the internode, which are the places in between the flowers and the leaves and the stalk. Kale if we change the leaf shape. And actually, I don't even know what this one is, but if we strengthen the lateral meristem, which is these things, not the terminal that goes up to the top, but the lateral that go off the sides. If we strengthen those, we can come up with this one. But they all have come from the mustard seed. And who did this? We did. Humans select traits that they prefer in crops and livestock, and it can lead to speciation. We definitely did it with dogs. We've changed dogs from the wolf to very strange looking creatures that look very unwolf-like. These species still can't interbreed, so that we haven't had a speciation event, but we've changed the traits so that they look different. And one that I like, and I used to see these going down to visit my parents down in North Carolina. There was a farm. I call them Oreo cows. Somebody liked this, and this is a trait that they pass on. It doesn't change the cow. This cow still can reproduce, but it could be eventually to a point where if we keep pulling these traits out, these could become different than a regular cow, if there is such an animal, and actually have a speciation event. Just like if we keep changing dogs, they may no longer be able to reproduce with the other dogs. That's a new species. And that's the end. Okay, thank you.